So we have about 20 minutes, and I'm going to let Rob do most of the talking here because he's far more interesting than I am. But as was mentioned, my name is Ryan Sweeney. I'm one of the partners at Accel, and have had the privilege of getting to know Rob on both a personal and professional level over the last 7 years through a variety of companies. And we're very lucky to have Rob and GoFundMe in our portfolio. How many of you guys are familiar with GoFundMe? So the simplest way I'll describe it, then I'll let Rob talk a little bit about the company, is it's a crowdfunding site. And I think when people think crowdfunding, they typically go to Kickstarter, Indiegogo, but in our view, GoFundMe is the leading crowdfunding site in the world right now. A couple stats for you that I wrote down because I do think it's relevant for the business. The company's been around for almost 6 years or so now. It took the first 5 years in GoFundMe's history, it took them to reach $1 billion in donations. And then Rob joined about 9 months ago, and they went from $1 billion to $2 billion. So think about that, 60 months or so to get $1 billion in donations. Another $1 billion came over the last 9 months. I think what's equally impressive is that there's been about 20 million or so people like us who have donated to causes on GoFundMe, and there's been about 2 million or so campaigns. So a really, really cool, big, scaling business that Rob is in charge of now, both on behalf of Accel and a number of other investors. But that doesn't do it justice. I'll let Rob talk a bit about the company and what the heck is GoFundMe?
Sure. So GoFundMe is kind of a crowdfunding site, but I like to think of it more as a marketplace for causes. So if you think about crowdfunding, I think Kickstarter did an amazing job of defining the space a number of years ago, and it's really focused on creative projects. GoFundMe is much different. We're focused on personal causes. To dimension the differences, Kickstarter just announced that it successfully funded its 100,000th campaign of all time. We do 100,000 campaigns a month now. As Ryan said, we went from $1 billion over the first 60 months to $2 billion over the last 9 months. So very different use cases. So creative projects is kind of GoFundMe, Indiegogo and Kickstarter. Personal causes is GoFundMe. Over the last few years, GoFundMe's become the largest marketplace for causes online. Our goal is to become the largest destination for giving in the world. If we were a nonprofit or a foundation, we'd be the 4th or 5th largest nonprofit in the world, and we'd be the 2nd largest foundation after the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So, scale and people coming together to help people is kind of changing the way people give, and we're going to evolve from crowdfunding to just becoming the world's largest site for giving.
So, you've been around Silicon Valley for a long time, Rob. Early days at Yahoo, Rob ran all of commerce for Yahoo. He was the CEO of a company called Sidestep that was sold to Kayak. He was the president of Groupon, and now you're CEO and chairman of GoFundMe, which I learned today that Rob voted himself as chairman. Why do this, right? You could have went and joined any food delivery, any alcohol delivery, any deodorant delivery company in Silicon Valley, but you chose to go to GoFundMe. What attracted you to this opportunity?
Sure. So if you think about Silicon Valley in the last 3, 4, 5 years has seen an explosion of unicorn companies, all worth $1 billion or more. There's a ton of companies that are all thriving, and they're doing what your mother used to do for you. So they're delivering your food, they're cleaning your clothes, they're giving you rides, and that's awesome. It's amazing. I think Uber is going to be one of the more special companies of all time. However, when you really think about Silicon Valley and the ability to use technology to make the world a much better place, we haven't done too much. I think Peter Thiel said something about we were promised flying cars and we got 140 characters. And I think there's some great stuff happening in Silicon Valley, but nobody's leveraging technology to change at least the giving space. The giving space is a gigantic space. It's a $350 billion a year market in North America. Globally, it's a $500 billion a year market. And if you think about it, almost every space out there, whether it's travel or transportation or commerce, have been disrupted by the internet and technology, and giving hasn't been disrupted at all yet. And I think there's a very unique opportunity to not only run a very profitable business, which is unique in Silicon Valley. There aren't too many consumer internet companies that are profitable. I think there's this unique opportunity to really impact and change the world in a dramatic way. So to date, we've had 2 million causes that have raised $2 billion and 30 million donors. I think over the next 5 years, we'll see that change by an order of magnitude. I can see $10 to $20 billion of donations flowing through our platform and tens of millions of causes being affected. And that's a pretty unique opportunity that we don't get every day. So I was driven by a couple things. One is really interesting business model, an ability to leverage technology to impact the world in a big way, and to really change the way people think about giving. Most nonprofits today are using direct mail and telemarketing to run their capital campaigns. If you think about that, that's crazy. I'm guessing most people in this audience and most startup people can't even remember the last time they wrote a check or answered a phone call and donated to a cause. I think by leveraging technology and the internet, we're going to change the way people give on a global scale, and that's exciting.
You touched on this a little bit in that answer, but I think it's worth double-clicking on. You mentioned the word profitable. In Silicon Valley over the last 3 to 4 years, I'd say that word hasn't been used too much. It's been grow, grow, grow at all costs, scale, that the world is becoming a smaller place. You can acquire users internationally faster than ever. You have to go and you have to do it any way possible. Spend what you have to do, go raise as much money as possible, and go, go, go. Don't worry about burn rates. GoFundMe is a profitable company. How do you manage that? I mean, how do you manage that today in Silicon Valley? How do you think about the trade-offs between profits and growing at all costs? How do you think about profits versus providing great snacks and masseuses and everything else? How do you run and think about it? We've been making this into an even more profitable business over the long run.
Yeah. So I think we're in the midst of a pretty seismic shift where the pendulum is swinging back towards rational behavior. We were in this irrational exuberance phase. I mentioned the unicorns. There's hundreds of companies worth $1 billion, and the reality is they really aren't worth $1 billion. They're going to be worth a lot less than that when real fundamentals are the judge, and that's happening now. There's a recruiting war going on. Whether you're starting up a company or involved in a startup or working at a big established company, people drive everything. It's really hard to recruit people, and in the past 3 months, it's changed pretty dramatically. I saw, when I started at GoFundMe 9 months ago, the ability to recruit an engineer and bring them on board was a pretty Herculean task. It was nearly impossible, and we've been spending all of our time trying to do that. And when you start thinking about how the world is shifting, people want to be part of an entity that's going to be here for the long term. They want to be part of a real business. So the conventional wisdom that has been ruling the day for the last 3 years is changing dramatically. A lot of the pundits are speaking pretty loudly about it. You might hear Bill Gurley and others talking about how the world is changing, and it is, and it makes it easier to recruit. Over time, a fair number of startups that raised money at ridiculous valuations won't be able to raise money, and they'll also have to contract quite a bit. They'll also have to, some of them will unfortunately have to go out of business, and I think we're going through this reset, which makes sense. It's better to build a business when it's harder to get money. It's better to build a business when the fundamentals are real. And I think we saw this in 2001, 2002. We saw this in 2008, 2009. Some of the best companies in the world were built in these downturns. So the PayPal Mafia is very famous for launching an amazing array of companies. That all happened after the first boom and bust cycle. Those guys built special companies right after one of these downturns. Same thing happened in 08 and 09, and that's when we saw Airbnb and Uber and some other special companies be launched and grown. I think running these businesses responsibly is harder, but it's the smart thing to do, and it's a pretty dramatic shift from what we've seen just 3 months ago. It's really changing in real time as we sit here.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, from Excel's perspective and being the investor in some of these companies, it's all about controlling your own destiny. And I think for the last couple of years, raising money, announcing the valuations has almost become a destination and a bit of a badge of honor. And the truth is, it just doesn't matter. And you think about the public markets and how companies are being valued and which ones are doing well as initial public offerings. It tends to be the ones with sustainable businesses that are profitable companies, go figure. And I think the nice thing when you're a private business is that you can operate as you see fit. You can call your own shots. You don't have the pressure of being in the public eye. But the flip side, if you do have good fundamentals and good unit economics, you get to control your own destiny. And that's just a critical point. And I think companies like GoFundMe, and you'll hear from Ryan Smith at Qualtrics next, they've done a really, really good job of that. And I think that's kind of why they've gotten to where they are today in a pretty meaningful way. Yep. Rob, you touched on recruiting. That's been the other thing. If you go across my portfolio here in Silicon Valley, the thing I've heard most consistently over the last 5 years is just it's impossible to recruit good talent. There's a lack of loyalty. People jump from one business to the next. What's the best way for me to go about getting the iOS engineer, the Android engineer? I'll pat Rob on the back. He's recruited a pretty amazing team, and I think you should take a moment to talk about some of your executive staff. But I think for the audience here too, just a little bit how you think about recruiting and kind of what you've learned through this environment.
Yeah, so I think as a CEO or as a functional leader in a startup or tech company in this environment, I'd argue if you're not spending more than 50% of your time recruiting, you're probably doing the company a disservice. Everything that we do in Silicon Valley is driven by people. If you don't have the best people, you can't build the best products, you can't build the best tech stack, you can't do anything that really matters if you don't have great people. I was really fortunate to find a group of people who were both mission-driven, wanting to join something that had a strong mission, and driven by the opportunities that Silicon Valley affords us of creating a company at scale that can have outsized impact. So I was able to pull somebody out of Greylock, a guy named David Hahn, who spent 10 years at LinkedIn and was an EIR at Greylock. He's my president and chief product officer, focused on everything product related. I was able to pull a guy out of Benchmark who Bill Gurley brought in to hopefully join one of his companies. And Hoang Vuong is our CFO and chief operating officer. And he built a few companies, recently sold a company to Intuit, and he was enamored by the profitability of GoFundMe and the mission that we were going after. Our CTO is a guy named Ujwal Singh, and Ujwal built Google Hangouts, which I'm sure a lot of you guys use on a regular basis to communicate with your teams all over the world. And then he joined YouTube to build their verticals. And Dan Pfeiffer is our most recent hire, and Dan was President Obama's press secretary. So I feel very fortunate that in this environment we've been able to pull in some of the best world-class talent out there. And it's the thing I focus on most. So over the last 9 months, I'd argue that 90% of my time has been focused on recruiting this team. So when I joined the company, we had 45 people. 9 months later now, we're at 130 people. We'll end the year at a little under 200 people. So if you believe that people drive everything, it's the most important thing you can do in building your company. Not only recruiting them, but nurturing them and making sure they love working on the projects that you put in front of them. Because it is easy to go from company to company to company. And the thing I keep telling everyone who joins GoFundMe is, I want this to be your last job. I want you to enjoy it so much here. I want you to have such a big impact that you never want to go anywhere else. And that's pretty naive, because they're all going to, at some point, leave, just based on how Silicon Valley evolves. But I think one lesson to learn is just focusing on recruiting and nurturing your people and making sure that they're excited about the work is one of the more important things you can do as a startup founder.
We're going to go off script, Rob, for 1 second. So we talked about business model, profitable, sustainable business model, to attracting good people. I think the third thing is just competition and what other people are doing around you. How, as an executive who's now kind of his fourth go-around, how much time do you think about the competition versus just controlling your own destiny and pushing forward with what you're doing and having others chase you?
So I think a really important lesson learned at Yahoo was we decided that in order to be a special company, we were going to play Google's game. And in playing Google's game, we de-emphasized what Yahoo was great at. Yahoo was the greatest kind of ad tech and ad sales and graphical media company in the world, better than everyone by far. And we decided to play the search game, which we couldn't win, and we let the competition kind of rule what we were doing. I think that's a huge mistake. I think you should always know what the competition is up to. You should keep an eye on them. But the reality is you can't do anything about them. What you can control is your destiny by executing to your product plan and your business plan. You should be aware of the competition, but a lot of people obsess on competition, and I think it's a huge mistake that we all make. It's very distracting, it's dangerous, it takes you away from the focus. The focus should really be on building great products and executing against your plans. So I think about the competition a lot. When I was at Groupon, everyone in the world came after us. It was an easy model to replicate. What nobody realized was we had some pretty important moats. We had this brand, and we had this sales force, and we had the merchant base. And Living Social was a fast follower that tried to compete with us. Google, Amazon, Facebook, the best companies in the world thought they could compete with Groupon. And what they didn't realize was it was a very high-touch, half man, half machine kind of business where you had to build a giant sales force and you had to do a lot of things that aren't very tech company focused. And we decided that we were just going to play our game, and if Amazon wanted to come after us, God bless them, let them try. Same with Facebook, same with Google, and we beat them all. That being said, Groupon made a few mistakes. However, it is really important not to let the competition drive your strategy. You have to control your destiny and execute according to your plans. And I'd argue that it's smart to be aware of the competition, but don't let them dictate what you do and how you do it.
Let's maybe just continue on that thread over the next couple of minutes. Is just a little more advice for the crowd. A lot of entrepreneurs here. As we said, you were early Yahoo, Sidestep to Kayak, Groupon, now GoFundMe. You've been through 2, 3, 4 iterations of the internet. It effectively makes
I'm not
you
that old, but
you're about 125 in internet years in terms of your career.
Yeah.
But as you go through those, I mean, you just touched upon Yahoo. What did you take away from the Sidestep experience, and then what did you take away from Groupon if you were going to go back in time and do differently?
Yeah, so Sidestep was a company that was the first player in meta search in the travel space. Then Kayak came along a few years after Sidestep was founded and built a much better development team. So when I took over Sidestep, it was a little bit of a turnaround. We were kind of doing the exact same thing as Kayak. Kayak was doing the exact same thing as us. We were paying for the same travelers. We were building the same products. And in competing with them, we both realized that we could pound the crap out of each other and end up being mediocre companies, or we could join forces and create something that's interesting. So the big takeaway there was, we built something interesting. The technology wasn't as strong as it needed to be. When I came in to help turn the company around, I realized pretty quickly that I could build, something kind of interesting and special, but not as special as the technology platform that Kayak built. So it made sense for us to join forces and take on the world as one entity versus two that would never see the light of a public offering. So by joining together, Kayak went public and then was eventually acquired by Priceline. And big lesson learned there was if you can't differentiate, don't give up, but don't keep pounding your head against the wall doing the same old thing that isn't going to allow you to break out. And I think when you realize that you're not doing something special, don't keep doing it for another 3 or 5 years. Get out and move on to your next thing. I hope that's not advice that you take with a grain of salt. Most of these startups aren't going to make it. It's just the laws of physics. Ryan's in a business where they bet on 10 things and 1 or 2 of them are an amazing success, 2 or 3 of them are terrible failures, and the other things in the middle are just mediocre. Do whatever you can to build something great. If you're not seeing it happen, move on to the next thing. Or join something great like an Uber or an Airbnb or a Facebook to learn what a great company feels like and then do it again. Don't stick at it for too long. Some people say stick at it till you get it right, but things move so quickly now. If you're not going to get it right after a year or 2 or 3, you're just not going to get it right. It's just something to think about as you build your companies. Big takeaway from Groupon was, we created this monster of a company that went from 100 people to 7,000 people in 1 year. We went from 1 country to 45 countries. I'd argue that what I learned at Groupon is anything is possible. And before there was an Uber, we created this playbook that allowed true amazing hypergrowth to happen at an accelerated pace, which we'd never seen before. And I think Uber is a great example of a company that followed a similar playbook and is creating something that's going to be here for a long time, that's going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars potentially. And sometimes you can defy the laws of physics. It's hard to do, but if you have a tiger by the tail, make that happen. Defy the laws of physics. Go faster than you think is humanly possible, and see what comes out on the other side of that.
Great. Why don't we wrap up with GoFundMe? You've been at it now for almost a year. Give the audience maybe just a couple quick examples. Your favorite cause that you've seen on the platform, maybe the most humorous, and last, the one that was kind of the biggest head scratcher for you.
Sure. Favorite cause, it's hard because if you spend any time on GoFundMe, you'll spend a lot of time having your heartstrings pulled, you'll cry. There's a lot of interesting things that happen on the platform. The one that's most memorable to me and the one that really, I think, started turning GoFundMe into part of the zeitgeist and turned it into more of a mainstream phenomenon is there's a guy named James Robertson, and James Robertson was like a 50-something-year-old guy who lives in Detroit, and he walks to work. And in walking to work, he walks 21 miles every day. And he's been doing that for 7 or 8 years, and somebody wrote about it in I think it was the Detroit Free Press or one of the local papers, and it was pretty interesting, right? If you think about it, a marathon is 26 miles. It takes most people months, if not years, to train for a marathon. This guy was walking every single day in the blazing summer heat or the freezing winter snow to work 21 miles a day. And this 19-year-old kid read the article, and he said, how could this be? How could this guy go to work every day? And a lot of his peers are kind of bitching and moaning about anything and everything. So he started a campaign. He wrote about James Robertson, and 13,000 people donated to the campaign, raised $350,000. James was able to buy a car. It was shared all over the internet. He now drives to work. So to me, it just showed the power of this platform. One day, this guy has no hope of getting out of the rut of being a minimum wage worker. The next day, literally, or next week, hundreds of thousands of dollars are raised for him. That one's super interesting. Another one that's super interesting is there's a girl named Eliza. She has a rare disease called Sanfilippo syndrome, and there's no known cure for this syndrome. Her dad was heartbroken when he learned about it, and he said, we're going to fix this, we're going to change this. And he started doing research, and he started finding the doctors who were doing cutting-edge research, and they weren't receiving enough funding because it's a very rare disease, and it's deadly. And he said, there's no way I'm going to let my daughter perish, and I'm going to find a cure for this disease. He single-handedly used GoFundMe to raise $2 million to fund a researcher or a set of researchers who are going to find a cure to this disease. They're still working on it. My hope is that they do that before time runs out, but pretty amazing to me that could happen. Head-scratching. Here's a good one, Kanye West. Kanye is $53 million in debt, and I don't know how that happens when you're Kanye West, but it happened. And one of his fans created a GoFundMe campaign. I'm not very proud of that one. I don't think Kanye needs the money, but he was able to raise some money. Kanye declined the money. He doesn't want the money, and hopefully we'll donate the money to charity. But what blew me away about that one is it was shared nearly 500,000 times on social media, this Kanye West campaign. And again, not that proud of it, but I'm pretty proud of the fact that the zeitgeist of what's going on in the world now suggests to someone that they can help anyone and anything. So that one's made me scratch my head a little bit, for sure.
With that, we're out of time. Thanks, guys.